what we are living now quite distinct from what we had experienced previously.
Možemo li tu da uhvatimo neku logiku?
We are in a situation where there's international law, but international justice is criminalized.
Zbog čega je onda NATO bilo važno da bombarduje?
That war was waged with a view to destroying a nation state.
Kako je vi vidite danas?
If there's going to be a trial, Hashim Thaci should be subjected to laws in Serbia.
Možda ima svetliju budućnost.
Serbia is my second homeland. What I appreciate most is the fact that there is a sense of solidarity despite all the problems.
Kanadski ekonomista je jedan od najuticajnijih svetskih intelektualaca. Poznat je širom sveta po svojoj kritici globalizma i objašnjavanju posljedica istog. Zato sa nama profesor Mišel Čosudovski. Profesore, hvala vam što ste prihvatili naš poziv i hvala vam na vremenu koje ste izdvojili za našu emisiju.
Thank you very much for your hospitality. I'm delighted to be on the program and to address some very important issues. The understanding of the crisis which we are currently experiencing, which is misunderstood, and it's largely misunderstood as the result of the mainstream media lies and fabrications and censorship at the level of the entire planet. And this is no longer a crisis which is limited to a number of countries. It's at the level of the entire world system, so to speak.
Nama je veliko zadovoljstvo što ste u našoj emisiji, što ste izdvojili vreme, iako vam je gust raspored, i naši gledalci se raduju vašem gostovanju, verujem. Kada ste pomenuli tu jednu globalnu ekonomsku situaciju, kako je vi vidite danas?
Well, you know, what we are living now is quite distinct from what we had experienced previously. We are first of all, politics is criminalized worldwide. In other words, the politicians who actually formulate economic policy are manipulated. This is something I think which people understand, that they are, first there's an intrusion in politics at the world level. We have regime changes at the world level. It's not limited to a small number of countries. And the war that we're experiencing now, we're experiencing war in many regions of the world, and they all have an economic dimension. Now, the last and unfolding event is the threats directed against Venezuela. Now, that is economic warfare. Why? Because Venezuela just so happens to be the number one in terms of reserves of oil and natural gas worldwide. And the United States, in terms of actual reserves of oil and natural gas, is minimal. And so that you have acts of economic warfare with a view to appropriating essentially control over energy. Now, if you look at the situation in the Middle East as well, in the Middle East, well, Iran is the number one producer of natural gas worldwide. It is the fourth in terms of petroleum. If you look at the system of alliances, you have three countries which control 51% of the reserves of natural gas, and that is Iran, Russia, and Qatar. And Qatar is an ally of Iran. It has a partnership. And I should mention that, in a sense, there are many contradictions, and also in how this is represented by the media. Qatar is playing obviously a very important geopolitical role in view of its partnership with Iran. And ironically, the United States' Central Command headquarters is located in Qatar, when in fact Qatar's main ally is Iran. So that these three countries have established also an agenda. It's a triple alliance between these three countries, and they control the market for natural gas. And then, of course, you might look at the situation in Western Europe, where there have been extensive hikes in the price of energy, but specifically natural gas. Well, there's the event of Nord Stream. Of course, we all know about Nord Stream, but at the same time, we also witness how, for instance, specifically in Germany, which is an industrial economy, where the main industrial interests are being destabilized as a result of the very significant hike in energy prices. And that hike in energy prices is largely due to the confrontation between Russia and the Western countries, namely US, NATO.
Da li BRICS ili proces dedolarizacije mogu biti protivteža toj ekonomskoj I vojnoj hegemoniji?
Well, I must say I'm fully supportive of BRICS in terms of ideas and concepts, but BRICS is heavily dollarized as well. Just to look at the B and the S. B is Brazil, and S is South Africa, and of course there are other members, but most of these countries are within the dollar-denominated framework, specifically Brazil. And Lula has been a faithful supporter of IMF policies right from the beginning of his mandate. Well, I interviewed Lula at one point, but the thing is, the Washington consensus considers that Lula is one of their best presidents. And I'm not making a judgment, because he has taken a stance on an anti-war stance and so on. But from an economic standpoint, Brazil is part of the dollar empire, and so is South Africa, and so are many of the other member states. Now, China is not. Because China, in fact, China holds the dollar-denominated debt instruments because there's been a balance of trade or balance of payments in favor of China. In other words, there's always a deficit on the U.S. side, and they have accumulated massive amounts of treasury bills and so on, which essentially is cash. And this enables the Chinese, they can go to America and buy up a company. They have the money for that. And they constitute an impediment to the dollar-denominated hegemonic American policy. Now, that is, in a sense, I've been following the issues in China for a good part of my career. I've written a book on China, and I can say that, first of all, China is a capitalist country. That we should understand. I'm not passing a judgment. They themselves acknowledge it's a capitalist country. But at this particular stage, China, which started up in the early 80s under Deng Xiaoping with a policy which was inherited from the earlier period, which consisted in restoring the treaty ports and the special economic zones, and with the objective of essentially supporting international trade. But that economy has evolved from the 1980s to the present, and now China is in advance of the United States in many areas of high technology. It is also an advance of the United States in regards to military technology, and it has an alliance with Russia, and that is what constitutes a lot of fear within the U.S. political apparatus, because at the outset, when Deng Xiaoping came to the leadership of the People's Republic of China, Deng Xiaoping was not an ally of Russia. Okay, and when he went to America, he actually expressed his position, his support of the United States. Now, the system of alliances is very important, but here we have a very important alliance is China and Russia, and it's a very firm alliance, and it's part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is far more. It's more important than BRICS from the geopolitical standpoint.
Koja je uloga medija u širenju tog fenomena koji vi često nazivate globalno siromaštvo?
Well, the media is the corporate media is responsible for sustaining disinformation and misinformation of what is actually happening. They will not recognize any important. They are not analyzing the crisis. They are providing nonsensical justifications for policies. Even they're supporting genocide. Let me mention something which is a bit personal, but it also has a bearing on Serbia. When I worked with Le Monde Diplomatique in Paris, the very prestigious monthly, for more than 10 years, and at the beginning of the war against Serbia, in other words, March of 1999, I sent my article for publication to the Monde Diplomatique, and it essentially stated that the KLA was linked to organized crime, and that Hashim Tashi had a criminal record with Interpol. Now, Interpol is an international entity, and the editor said, we can't publish that. And that was the end of my career with the Monde Diplomatique, because I said Hashim Tashi has a file with Interpol. That means he has a criminal record. And he has more than a criminal record, but that we don't need to get into that. But had the media, the Western media, covered that war by telling the truth, we wouldn't have had a war. They have acknowledged the fact that this was a humanitarian war. It wasn't a humanitarian war. And they have done that all over the world. I mean, that, in my mind, was historical because all the left was supportive of the war against your country at that time. And then I realized subsequently that this censorship, of course, was deliberate, and the Monde Diplomatique, in many regards, was responsible for that war. The Monde Diplomatique and the mainstream media. And then, of course, 23 years later, Hashim Tashis, they say, oh, he is a criminal. But it was too late. He had served as prime minister and president of Kosovo, and then they sent him to The Hague for a legal procedure when they knew well in advance that he was on the Interpol list back in the late 90s.
Sami ste rekli da se istina znala, taj rat se ne bi desio. Zbog čega je onda NATO bilo važno da bombarduje Saveznu Republiku Jugoslaviju tada 99. a i da nakon toga u decenijama nastavi pokušaje parčanja Srbije?
Well, that's a very complex question because it's the history of an entire country. But I think that ultimately it was, that war was waged with a view to destroying a nation state, and at the same time destroying what was a very successful project, societal project. And I'm not saying that from the let's say from the Yugoslav point of view. I was at the time I was studying planning in the Netherlands at the Institute of Social Studies, and we considered Yugoslavia as a success story. It was market socialism. It was committed to extensively committed to social objectives and so on. And my first visit to Yugoslavia was in 1967. I was a student, and I actually at that time I proposed to the institute, which was a public institution. Now it's linked to, it's a part of Erasmus University. But I said, well, let's go to Yugoslavia. And we put together a program, and 20 students and professors came, and we were in Belgrade. We were in different parts of the country. But what struck me most at that time is that, this is very personal, but it reflects on the project and also on the state of Serbia and also on the history of the Serbian people. I felt sick. Nothing serious, and while my colleagues were going to a meeting at some organization, I went to see a medical doctor, and he diagnosed it. It was nothing serious, a small infection, and he gave me medication and so on and so forth. And then I said, "How much do I owe you?" And he said, "Nothing, because you are a guest of our country, and we extend our health coverage to people who visit our country." Now, imagine that doesn't exist in any other country in the world at that time or today. I mean, if you look at the European Union, they have agreements, but it is all financed. It's not straightforward. And if somebody goes to Germany, they will have to pay. So the thing is that this was not based on, of course, probably an economist, a neoliberal economist would have said, you can't do that because you're going to have a deficit, and all these tourists are going to come and ransack your healthcare system. But from the point of view of, that was a Serbian concept, and it is still there, but the money now is not allocated to health anymore in the same way as it was at that time. But I think that was one of the reasons why this project has to be removed, because it was, well, first of all, we were in the Cold War era, or the post-Cold War era in 1999, and come forward to 1999. This was a way, this was to destabilize every single alternative to global capitalism, the neoliberal agenda. And what happened in Yugoslavia, it was modeled on what happened in a number of third world countries. I actually, to put it, to look at it historically, in the 90s, I was teaching in Peru. I was at the Catholic University of Peru, and I witnessed, and I was also involved in studying the policies which were imposed by the IMF and the World Bank at that time, and these were far more serious than those which had been imposed at an earlier period in history in Chile and Argentina. I lived through those two military coups. Okay, I was in Chile in '73, and then I was in Córdoba, Argentina, teaching at the university in 1976. I witnessed those two coups. But what happened in Peru under a democratically elected government was an increase of 31 times in the price of energy, of fuel, in one single day. Now, anybody who has some understanding of the prices of energy knows that this destroys and destabilizes the country totally. Okay? It happened 31 times. Now, what happened in your country was not necessarily of the same order, but of course, let me say that I got hold of this World Bank document, which was not a private document. It was circulating within the governmental structures in Yugoslavia, and also and also it was there for policy making. But when I saw that this bankruptcy program of the World Bank, where the whole industrial sector would be precipitated into bankruptcy on the orders of a document, where they said 40 days, etc. I can't get into the details, but this was devastating because it destroyed the whole fabric of the project, which was launched in the wake of World War II, and which was market socialism, which was very successful. And the object was not only to destroy it, but was to appropriate the wealth. In terms of resources and mineral resources in particular, and then also it was also the object of the United States to militarize, and that they did by. They have militarized the whole Western European space, but not Yugoslavia. And then in Kosovo, they establish this largest military base in Europe in Kosovo. Very convenient. With the support of a prime minister and a president who were linked to organized crime. Now, the advantage of people, of heads of state and heads of government who have a criminal record is that they obey orders. Okay? We know that. Okay? If you have a criminal record, you are the instrument of powerful economic interests. And that is what happened, and that's what happened with Hashim Tashi.
Da li onda im zato ne odgovaraju lideri kao što je to, ne znam, u jednom trenutku bio Milošević koji nije imao kriminalni dosije, a koji je posle završetka rata želeo da ispriča svoje viđenje toga zapravo istinu?
Let me first of all mention that I was selected by Milosevic as a witness for the Hague tribunal, and he had invited me to come for conversations in the prison. I was in Holland at the time, and I went to see him, and he had read my book on. He had read my book, and he was familiar with my writings, but specifically, he was very much, of course, focused on Al-Qaeda and the fact that Al-Qaeda was linked up with the KLA, the USHK, and also the role of the military professional resources incorporated, which were involved in supporting both the KLA as well as the massacres of Serbian people in Croatia. Okay, now I had largely focused on how the KLA and Al-Qaeda were linked. And that was a process also of financing them, and also the fact that this was known also that there were no crimes committed by the Serbian forces in Kosovo. But in any event, we had a very informal discussion, and then he said he called me Misha, okay, so because my name is Michael, but he had very specific questions on that. Now, the issue of his I should mention that that while I was there, the personnel from the prison would take his blood pressure, and they were very friendly and respectful. But as we know, he was refused medical treatment. He had high blood pressure, and he needed medical treatment at the hospital level, and that was refused to him. So that was the first element. But I think what I'm saying about his being poisoned is well documented, and I simply have read those documents, but there was another aspect concerning the trial, is that he was denied the right of self-defense. That was very important. He was denied the right of self-defense, and I took the decision to write to they appointed what they called amicus curiae. Now, the amicus curiae, we know that amicus curiae really is not an instrument of the person who is being accused. It really is an instrument of the judges of the court. And there were two lawyers from the United Kingdom who accepted that they violated their code of ethics. These two lawyers from the United Kingdom were appointed by the court, and it was amicus curiae. I wrote to the British Bar Association and pointed to the conflict of interest, and they in turn, this in turn was raised at the level of the court. But in effect, I decided not to go. But I decided not to go because the court had denied Milosevic the right of self-defense, which is a fundamental right in international law. So that in itself was an element. Now, he was then denied the right to medical treatment. Again, there's a whole legal concepts which say that prisoners are entitled to medical treatment, and then at a later stage there was a project to kill him through poison in his food. Now he knew it. And he contacted, but all of this is on record. It's these are documents which people can consult. But he contacted the Russian embassy. I don't know whether his letter to the Russian embassy actually reached the Russian embassy, but he in this letter he says they have put something in my food, and I need immediate medical treatment. And he passed away 2 or 3 days after he knew that this was poison. And his letter says it very clearly. And then, of course, they said that there was some kind of an inquiry, but in fact, it so happens that it was the judges that had blocked the inquiry, and they were never. We were not. I don't think that they were able to prove what was in the food that was given to Milosevic. But I mean, from the documents that I've consulted, he was assassinated. That's absolutely clear. Now, I also, and this is what I mentioned when I came last March for the commemoration, and then I was also present at when we commemorated his birth. I think that what the Serbian government should do is to repatriate Hashim Tashi. I'm not sure whether he's still in The Hague or not, but that's what I said last March, that if there's going to be a trial, Hashim Tashi should be subjected to laws in Serbia, not to some fake international court there, which will ultimately come up with some statement to the effect that, well, he was a criminal, but well, first of all, the criminality rests with the court because it took them 23 years before they actually initiated a criminal procedure against him. Now, if they had brought Hashim Tashi to The Hague in 1999, there wouldn't have been a war. And there would have been a prime minister and a president who has a criminal record and who obeys orders from NATO or from the United States. That is the nature of what that is what we have to address.
Jedna isto neprincipijelna stvar jeste podrška SAD-a često militantnim muslimanima u tokom rata u Bosni, a danas da krše sporazum koji je potpisan pod njihovim patronatom u Daytonu na štetu Republike Srpske. Možemo li tu da uhvatimo neku logiku?
I'd rather not tackle that because it's very complicated and I'm not up to date in that question. Okay, sorry, but yeah, I mean I can reflect on what happened with the Dayton Agreement and all that. I think that's important, but maybe formulated the question a little bit differently. Well, with regard to Bosnia-Herzegovina, my understanding dates back to when I was analyzing this in the context of the war in 1999. But in fact, Bosnia-Herzegovina came at a much earlier stage. It was in the mid, if I recall correctly, it was in the mid-90s. And then there was this agreement, the Dayton Agreement, which was held in a U.S. military base. It was a military base in Dayton, Ohio, and they brought in a whole load of lawyers. Okay, and these lawyers obviously were co-opted, and they were largely Western lawyers. And first of all, they established a colonial entity, and what struck me at that particular point was that the chairman of the Central Bank of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which was created in Dayton, Ohio, there was a clause in the Constitution. They wrote the Constitution. There, a bunch of lawyers. It was a colonial, and it remains a colonial entity. But at that particular time, they said the president of the Central Bank of Bosnia-Herzegovina cannot be a citizen of Bosnia-Herzegovina or of a neighboring country. That was in the Constitution. The president of the Central Bank of Bosnia-Herzegovina is appointed by the International Monetary Fund. Now, that set the basis for what is happening today. That is a colonial apparatus, which it's more than a colonial apparatus. It has an elected. It doesn't have any kind of elected government. It has an appointee, which is allegedly in place with the support of the United Nations, but it is a colonial apparatus which has been instilled by NATO. Well, NATO was not legally involved at the moment of the Dayton Agreement, but the United States was involved. And there's another element which is very important there in the understanding of what happened. And I'll mention it now because it's persistently in my mind. There was a report, that was during the Clinton administration. There was a report by the Republican Party in the U.S. Senate, a very detailed report it was sponsored by Senator Larry Craig. Now, Senator Larry Craig had put together this Republican Party report, which was documented, which was quoting many sources and so on. And there was a very interesting paragraph in that they said that President Clinton had contacts with Osama bin Laden. Okay, I can't get the exact text, but I will make the text public too. I have that text. Now, we published that text, and it was very detailed as to how the Clinton administration was involved in dirty tricks in what today constitutes former Yugoslavia, but specifically Bosnia-Herzegovina. And how they said how there was an agreement between Clinton and the Al-Qaeda nexus. And mind you, of course, at the time there was also support that came from a number of Muslim countries, largely, I think, because they didn't really understand what was going on. Because, I mean, Iran sent support, material support, financing, and so on. So did Malaysia, and that was under a progressive prime minister. I don't think that I have a personal relationship with the former prime minister of Malaysia, Tun Mahathir Mohamad, because he initiated the process of criminalizing war. And I was one of the signatories of that procedure. But the thing is that there was a lot of confusion, and then I published that on our website, this report, and I think it should be published in Serbia. It's a very important report. In other words, it revealed the fact that Clinton was supportive of Al-Qaeda operations within Bosnia-Herzegovina and, of course, Kosovo as well. But you might recall that there was a special envoy called Peter Galbraith, okay? Peter Galbraith was sent by Bill Clinton to represent the United States in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and he is the son of a very renowned economist, which is John Kenneth Galbraith. So the Peter Galbraith was sent by the government, and then I got an email saying, take down this report by the Republican Party. In other words, he was pressuring because the report of the Republican Party was saying things which were carefully documented, but which went against the actions of the Clinton administration in Bosnia-Herzegovina. That report, I think, is there to show how the Clinton administration were complicit in what happened, and specifically, again, it led to the Dayton agreements, and it led to a colonial framework, which is now being questioned. But the main framework is still there, you can take it to the United Nations, but then the United Nations says, well, no, they are also, in many regards, co-opted. So what to summarize, we are we are in a situation where there's international law, but international justice is criminalized. International justice is criminalized because the politicians function with reference to international law. It is a criminal endeavor to impose a colonial regime run by the IMF in a sovereign country, namely Yugoslavia at the time.
Prelazimo na poslednje Rubikon pitanje. Da li možemo da zaključimo, poručimo ili predvidimo da Srbija možda zbog svojih veza sa Rusijom i Kinom, koje su dinamične, možda ima svetliju budućnost u jednoj ekonomskoj krizi koju ste najavili?
Well, that's a very difficult question for me, and I don't want to get involved in internal politics. I think it's very important, of course, that Serbia act in relation to what has unfolded, at least as the restoration of diplomatic ties between the United States and Russia. I don't think that the meeting in Alaska is going to change the course of history, but it certainly restores what was required, which is diplomacy, and I think that Serbia can, in many regards, also establish that relationship. But mind you, the whole BRICS and I think that Serbia is a partner. It's not a full member of BRICS, but it's a partner of BRICS, if I'm not mistaken. But I think that kind of let's say trilateral diplomacy is very important. That there be now, if we look at the situation in regards to the European Union, there is no dialogue, and Serbia, I think, can perform a historical moment there, because it is still a non-aligned country. It's a non-aligned country with all its internal problems. But at the diplomatic level, it could facilitate those avenues at this stage. And I mean, I'd like to conclude on that.
Hvala vam puno na vremenu koje ste odvojili za nas. Nadamo se nekom ponovnom gostovanju. Ima mnogo tema.
Well, my sincere thanks, and I mean, Serbia is a bit my second homeland, and what I appreciate most is the fact that there is a sense of solidarity, despite all the problems that are facing your country, which is unprecedented. You don't find it anywhere else. So my heart is in Serbia, and will always be in Serbia.